started. Thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Mike Lan. I'm an associate professor at UMass Boston and current chair of ASPA section on science and technology in government. Before I turn the Zoom podium to Georgette to get started, just two quick announcements. One is the session is recorded, and we'll post the recording on our social media, especially the Facebook. So if you wanna, after watching it, we wanna share with others, please come to our Facebook and watch the video. And then second is, like, as I said, I work remotely from South Korea. Over here is February 12th, is the Lunar New Year. So I think it's really auspicious or fortunate for us to start STIG program with Dr. Gil-Garcia, and thank Dr. Gil-Garcia for starting our kicking off our program this year. I think we are very, very fortunate. So without further ado,
thank you very much.
I'll introduce our moderator today, Dr. Georgette Dumont, from Associate Professor of Public Policy at University of North Florida. There you go.
Thank you, Michael. I want to also welcome everyone, and we are so happy that you are able to join us today for what we believe is going to be a very interesting presentation. Before we start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ASPA's section on science and technology in government. The mission of STIG, that's what we call it, is to assist interested public administrators in learning about the uses and limitations of science and technology in government. By promoting awareness of programs involving science and technology, STIG enables the results of these programs to be used to improve governmental effectiveness and efficiency. STIG and its members are interested in a broad range of topics, from environmental science to information technology to science innovation policies and everything in between. These are dynamic and exciting subject matters which government continues to grapple with and needs researchers and practitioners to help explore them and how government can leverage these tools to be better in the future. So if you want more information about STIG, feel free to visit our website. The site is SSTIG.info. And so let me formally welcome you to our third brown bag discussion. Today we will hear from Dr. Ramon Gil-Garcia from the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy and Center for Technology in Government. He will be talking about his research project titled Towards Data-Driven Decision-Making in Government, Identifying Opportunities and Challenges for Data Use and Analytics. And these are two very hot topics right now. In order to ensure a timely event, questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat feature if you'd like to submit a question prior to the end, or if you wish to ask the question yourself, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and you will be called on. In the meantime, please make sure you are muted. With all that said, let's welcome Dr. Gil-Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael and Georgette, for the invitation. So let me share the screen. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here today. So today, as Georgette said, I'm gonna talk about a project that we have that tries to understand how government organizations can transition, to data-driven decision-making. And so I first want to acknowledge, my colleagues from both Rockefeller College and Center for Technology in Government, who are also part of this project. You can see the full list here. And also, I want to be very transparent in terms of this project has been already presented at the Hawaiian International Conference on System Sciences. So if you attended virtually, of course, HICS this year, unfortunately, it was not in Hawaii. You may have already seen, a very similar version of this presentation. So I apologize about that. Okay, so let's start. So basically, the idea of data-driven decision-making in government is now to think about it as a reform strategy. So basically, we want to understand how transitioning to data-driven decision-making may not only involve information technology and the use of data, but also organizational and social transformations. And so basically, as you can see here, a lot of people now is talking about data-driven decision-making and how can benefit, the public sector, basically paying more attention to advanced information technologies and the use of big data. However, in our view, this also involves various organizational and institutional efforts. Just to give an example, like for example, cultural support, for analysts, just a culture that is friendly with data and data analysis, as well as the use of some sophisticated techniques. So when we put all of this together, information technologies, data could be big or small, organization, institutional efforts, and sophisticated techniques, we think that we have the right ingredients for data-driven decision-making. However, the discussion largely lacks empirical evidence. And I am sure that if you are interested in this topic, you have realized that there are not many empirical articles, about data-driven decision-making, particularly focusing on this transitioning, from not using so much data, to make decisions, to actually use a lot of data and analysis to make decisions. And also, the current discussion doesn't explain why organizations struggle even when well-established information systems and technologies are in place. And that's part of our argument, that it's not only about that, it's basically they may have very good information systems, they may have very recent technologies, and still they may have issues because they still need to transform parts of the organization to make it a better place for data-driven decision-making. The second idea of this paper is that the evidence-based policy perspective could be also useful to think about data-driven decision-making. So some of you know, evidence-based policy refers to the idea that policymaking should be based on scientific evidence by decoupling from politics and other threats to rationality. Of course, we know also that this is not always realistic, or is not realistic most of the time. But the fact that we are trying to do that, the fact that we are trying to get more evidence and then make decisions using that evidence is one of the goals, of evidence-based policy. And of course, we are not saying that experience or intuition is not important. They might be also very important in certain domains, but the fact that you are using data and you can have strong evidence could be a very good way to complement your decision-making process. So it shares an utilitarian philosophy with data-driven decision-making. However, its argument includes a long-standing discussion about quality standard of good evidence. So basically, this could be translated in two things: using high-quality data, which sometimes is available, sometimes it's not available, in government settings, and solid analysis. So basically, to get good evidence according to this perspective, we need to have good data and also solid analysis. And then the other difference also is that this approach emphasizes two conditions for good evidence: systematic investigation and theoretical approach. So systematic investigation refers more to the methodology. So basically, what are the methods that we are using to get to that evidence? And of course, the scientific method using statistics, using a deductive approach could be, ways to have this systematic investigation. And then the theoretical approach, as you know, is more related to where the hypotheses come from. So we can be data-driven for sure and just go with the data, but that might not help us to actually be able to generalize the situation. So basically, what we want to do is to review previous research, to have a good understanding of theory, and then basically develop hypotheses that we are going to test with the use of data and analysis. And so basically, this is something explicit when we think about evidence-based policy. It's not always explicit when we think data-driven decision-making. And in fact, as I'm sure you have heard, some people think that theory is not necessary anymore. That basically now that we have so much data and techniques that are so sophisticated, we can just go with the data. So here, our approach and our argument is that this is not the case, at least not in most of the situations when we think about government agencies. And then also, discussion of evidence quality poses a new direction as an additional challenge to organizations that attempt to implement this data-driven decision-making, because now it is not only about having good data, having good technology, but it's also having a systematic investigation, a good process, basically, and a strong theoretical approach in which they really need to know, a lot about the topic that they are trying to understand and potentially have a solution, if it is a problem, which is in this case, as you are going to see later, for this project. So the research aim, of this project is twofold. So basically opportunities and challenges when transitioning to data-driven decision-making. So we want to understand, what are the opportunities, the potential benefits that they can get, but also the challenges, that they are facing in this transition. And then based on a case study, which is, what I'm going to explain a little bit later today, we describe which determinants help or hamper the production of policy evidence through data-driven decision-making. So basically, we are going to try to understand each of these determinants from the point of view of the people involved in these processes. So our case is a US State Department for Water Quality Management, specifically Division of Water, that oversees water chemistry data and water permits. So basically, they use water chemistry data to make decisions about, among other things, water permits and also sanctions. If they need to give sanctions, to certain organizations or certain individuals. And then this division has recently been struggling to address statewide, two problems: harmful algal blooms, HABs, and high chloride concentrations. So basically, we approach them in trying to understand two specific problems that they are trying to address. And we use these problems as a way for us to understand, how data-driven decision-making could be applicable, to these type of government agencies. So in terms of the research design, we have 12 in-depth interviews, 5 managers and 7 research scientists. We also conducted several meetings and group interviews with the full team and with the smaller teams. And also we did analysis of their formal documents, but also their data sets. And this was very interesting for us that we could also have access to the actual data sets, because in addition to the more traditional research methods, we were also able to reproduce some of the analysis that they were trying to do, and actually to do it with their own techniques and their own technologies, and also to do it with different techniques and other technologies. So we are basically using mostly statistics and artificial intelligence, for this. Okay, so in terms of the results, so basically we divided, the determinants in different categories. So the first one is data determinants. So I'm going to start with data quality and coverage. So basically, the agency's in-house data doesn't have any problem. They follow all the EPA requirements and is high quality. The problem is that they do manual sampling. So basically, they have a very limited data coverage because, of course, it's very expensive to do manual sampling. And that's the only way that they can, get to the type of data that they need. And so their challenge is feeling confident that the amount of data or the evidence that they can get from that data is enough to make an important decision. Because basically, as I said before, some of their decisions directly affect individuals. And so they want to feel confident that whatever decision they are making based on those data or on that evidence is strong enough, for them to be able to make that decision. So this is, one of the challenges. And as I said before, it's in part because of that. They have data that is high quality, but limited coverage. Now, the next one in terms of data determinants is compatibility and interoperability. So basically, there is a lot of exchanges of data and also different ways to compile the data. And this could happen with individual analysts, teams, and bureaus of the division. And basically, this is good because it's a flexible way to work. So sometimes they need to do specific analysis and they need kind of similar or the same data sets to do different types of analysis. So it's good for them to be able to work, in these different teams and also to work individually to be able to tackle some of these difficult questions. However, the existence of multiple data producers and analysts has also caused some version incompatibility issues. And in fact, as you may imagine, data elements from data sets created by different teams or individual analysts are not always easy to match or combine into new data sets. And sometimes they cannot even use them, because one of the other things that happen is that all this flexibility also relates to not only how they use data, but also what type of software they use to analyze the data and to store the data. And so basically, there are some situations in which they cannot even use the same data sets to, for example, reproduce, replicate, some of the analysis. So this could be also a challenge, although, as I said before, it could also be seen as an advantage because of the flexibility that it provides to them. Then thinking about external data, so as I mentioned before, they have internal data, which is very good, very high quality, but of course, it's not enough. So sometimes they take advantage of using external data sets when answering relatively complicated and tricky questions, and also not only because of the limited coverage, but also because they don't collect all the independent variables that they need. And so they need to rely on external data sets. However, external data also brings about challenges because, of course, the quality is not always the same. Sometimes it is not clear. They don't have good metadata. So it's just much more difficult to use external data than to use internal data, just because they don't know enough sometimes about these external sources, and they need to spend a lot of time trying to understand their limitations and also their potential. So that's one. The other one is also, there is also resistance to share data across agencies' boundaries. And this is not new. We have been seeing this for a long time, and data analytics is not different, from other previous, strategies and technologies. So some managers feel they are the owners of the agency's data and not only the stewards. So it's very difficult to get data from other state agencies if they feel that it is not part of their job, that is not part of their mission. And although they can see that there is an important problem, they are not willing to share the necessary data. So now we go to technological determinants. So the first one is information systems and software. So basically, they already have some advanced analytics technologies and database management systems. And so they have been important, for their daily work. However, existing systems become also obsolete and sometimes constrain the adoption of new technologies. So basically, in their case, some of these systems are the repository of data, and they are particularly old. So these legacy systems are very difficult, in terms of transferring data to different systems and analysis software. And so this hampers their ability, to do some of these necessary analysis. So basically, this is also a situation that they are dealing with. Again, sometimes there is software, as you know, that is free. And so they are trying to take advantage of that. So they are trying to use more and more R and Python, and other software and technologies. But also they already have these systems that are their database management systems. And so they need to still use also those systems. And sometimes that is not the more conducive way for their data analysis. Then we have analytical techniques. So this is one of those government agencies that already relies heavily on statistical analysis. So they didn't start from zero. They didn't start in a situation in which most of the decisions were made by experience or intuition. They already have this. However, there is a difference in viewpoint between analysts and high-level decision makers in how to approach the evidence. And you can imagine this, sometimes, they are thinking that how much evidence you need to make a good decision, but also they are thinking about, we need to make this decision as soon as possible. And so this could include unrealistic timeframes that are not conducive to appropriate data collection or sound analysis. And so basically there are tensions, between different groups within the organization that have different views of the importance of evidence and also how to use analytical techniques in the best possible way in order to make, good decisions. And part of the situation is that also what is a good decision, and I think it depends on if you are taking a more analyst view, a more scientific view. You may have a very different opinion about what is a good decision or what is good evidence to make a decision if you feel the pressure, either administrative or political pressure to make a decision with any evidence that you may have. And of course, if you are used to, in general, to make decisions almost without any data, then you don't see that as a problem. And so that is part of the tensions and pressure that they have, within the organization. Then we go to organizational determinants. So here we are talking about cooperation. So cooperation, as I mentioned before, is very important. And actually, a lot of the data production analysis is conducted in teams, through organizational cooperation among multiple staff members. And they also use multiple techniques. One thing to highlight is that they are not always good in all the techniques. So basically, there are people that are more specialized in using certain techniques and certain software, and people that are more specialized in using other techniques and other software. So part of the challenge, or part of what what they need to do, is also to have very good communication among them in such a way that they can really have this collaborative approach. And now part of the problem is that although they have this culture of cooperation and they are always working collaboratively, using different teams and even just among individuals, the IT infrastructure is not always supportive of the necessary collaborative approach. So basically, we have another tension here between how they normally work in terms of cooperation and collaboration versus what they can do with the infrastructure that they have, which is mostly designed for individual work. And so it's, again, something to think about, when we know that the type of analysis that is needed needs to have input from multiple staff members. Another determinant at the organizational level is culture. And here we can think about culture towards the use of data and data analysis for decision making. So how friendly, for example, is organization, how much they think that using data and doing data analysis is good for the organization and for decision making, how open they are to make decisions in a different way. We can also think about a research-oriented culture. And in this case specifically, they also have flexibility of research scientists as a job title. So basically, research scientists, in addition to do work that is more related to the permits and and to sanctions and to other day-to-day operations, they also have additional responsibilities, such as publications and presentations at conferences. And so this is interesting because this pushes them to try to have the same standards as you would have if you would be working at a university or a research center. And of course, again, if we think about this, and then we think about what we just said about decision makers thinking differently about evidence and about the process of analysis and the timeframes, then this could also exacerbate the tension between these two type of actors, within the organization, because now we have even more motivation and incentives for research scientists to go beyond what could be practically or good enough, let's put it that way, good enough, and try to really have evidence that is sound and based on good data and good analysis. Then we go to institutional determinants. So one of them is privacy and confidentiality. So as we all know, public perception greatly influences the data the government collects. So if people think that they don't feel comfortable sharing data with government, they may affect, what we think should be collected or not. But in this case, it's not only that. It's not only that general feeling of people about privacy and confidentiality, but it's also related to the freedom of information laws and regulations, because they also affect what will be collected for private entities and individuals. And this is because once the agency has the information, it becomes public information. So even if it is related to organizations or individuals that are not following a rule, for example, there might be situations in which they really don't want their information to be collected, because then it's going to be shared, or it could be shared, basically because, of FOIA. And then, so sometimes, the implication of that is sometimes information necessary for meaningful analysis is not available, just because they are not collecting that information, because the individuals and organizations do not agree with that, and there are privacy and confidentiality concerns about collecting that additional information. So sometimes they need to do analysis with information that they know is incomplete, but they also know that the agency is not going to collect that information because of these concerns about privacy. Then the next one, institutional determinants, is public procurement. So accessing free online tools and communities is not always easy. It's regulated by state laws and other rules, and most of the time is very limited, and sometimes it's even prohibited. And so this lack of access greatly affects what analysis can be performed and by whom. It could be the case that some analysts have more access than others. It could be the case that some agencies have different limitations and restrictions than others. And so this limits the overall analytical capacity of agencies. So basically, although they would be very willing, and some of them are very savvy about some of these free online tools and communities, there are instances in which they cannot use them. So the example here is GitHub, but it's not only that. It's in general these open access, communities and open access tools that many times they are limited or even prohibited, by state laws and regulations. So in conclusion, so the 9 determinants highlight the nature of data-driven decision-making, and as I said at the beginning, which involves not only the technology, not only the data, not only the analysis techniques, but also significant organizational and institutional transformations. And sometimes people are not paying attention to that. And I know that this is not new for people that do research in digital government. However, the hype of data analytics And I think now it's becoming similar, with data-driven decision making. Most of the time, do not emphasize enough that these changes are necessary. So these determinants reveal practical issues that public organizations could face when implementing data-driven decision-making. So the idea could be, for public managers to analyze, all these different determinants and see which of them they can do something about it, which of them they can solve, which of them they can at least understand, and which of them they just need to be aware. Maybe they cannot do anything about it, but at least they need to be aware of how these different determinants may affect the success of their data-driven decision-making initiative. So basically, a strategy should be that, the result of that analysis in which people try to maximize the opportunities while minimizing the challenges in such a way that they can increase the probabilities of success. And so, again, the idea is just to take everything into consideration and to understand as clearly as possible what are the things that can be changed and what are the things that are going to have an impact, but that public managers cannot really change, but need to be aware and try to maybe modify their strategy in such a way that is more realistic in terms of implementation. So with that, I am done for the presentation part, and I am open to questions. I think Georgette is going to moderate.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much, Ramon. I enjoyed the presentation. I have some notes, but I'm going to yield the floor to Mete, I think is how you say it.
That's right.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Ramon, for this interesting presentation. My question is, hi, Ramon. What kind of links do you see between data-driven decision-making in government and the increased use of nudging behavioral public policies in government? Thank you.
This is interesting. I think that understanding, the behavior better is going to help us to also do, better decision making in general. And I think the difference is, I think, how to use those data and how to use the evidence. So just to give you an example. I was reading an article, maybe some of you have already read that one, about an MIT professor that is considered like the czar of data analytics, and big data. And so basically what they were saying is that now is the opposite, that now we are going to know so much, we are going to have so much information that we are going to learn a lot about people's actual behavior than we were able to do before. And so basically, using cellular location data, for example, or using your activity in the things that you buy, and many other, of these very small pieces of information, when you put them all together, then we learn a lot about the actual behavior of people, not about their intentions, not about their perceptions, but the actual behavior of people. So if we believe that this is really going to be the case, I think there are going to be a lot of linkages, between data-driven decision-making and how we can use behavioral science, in public administration. Whether that happens or not, and when that happens, I am not sure. It all depends. So people, as you also may know, before, there was almost a race, between or among, all the different companies that are harvesting our data, Facebook, Google, others. But now, at least in Europe, with the new regulations, this is not as easy as before. And so it's just something to think about.
Great, thank you. Did that answer your question?
Thank you very much for the detailed answer. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I have a question. Data-driven decision is something that is on the minds of many public administrators, but then there's that good old political aspect as well. So while the data argues that this should be the route that you take, needs to be what's addressed first, politically, it's not doable. So an example that we often use, that we deal with here, is repaving streets. We do a complete street analysis throughout the city, and it identifies scientifically all the streets that need to be done, or at least the sections of streets. But you can't just do one section and then go back and do another section somewhere else, because people are going to be mad that their whole neighborhood wasn't done, or the other places are going to say that we're not getting the level of services that that neighborhood seems to be getting all the attention on. Do you incorporate politics at all into your model, or do you account for it in any way?
Not in this one, Georgette, but I totally agree. So that's why I said at the beginning that sometimes, some of the assumptions of data-driven decision-making are not very realistic. I totally agree with you, because you can have all the information, you can have all the analysis, but at the end, somebody's going to make a decision, and that person is going to decide if they use the data or not, or to what extent they use the data. And so I would say, and just being maybe too naive or optimistic, that what we can do is just to try to have as much data and evidence as possible, and hope that the actual decision makers, which, who most of the time, as you said, are politicians, at least take them into consideration. Maybe they are not going to make all the decisions, using the data, but at least that they take those data and the evidence into consideration when making some of the decisions. That's one way to respond. Another way is to think about also different type of decisions that we are willing to make with more or less human intervention. And this is also related to a certain extent with artificial intelligence. So basically, there might be decisions that we are okay if, for example, let's say we have flooding problems, and we have sensors, in the river that is in the middle of the city. And so the decision of having an alarm of flooding doing by a sensor and a system might be okay without almost any human intervention. But then when we think about things like your example of, paving, the streets, I think that to a certain extent, part of that decision could be made using data, but part of that decision, the political appointees or elected officials, they want to have a part on that, because they want people to see that they are doing something, for their constituents. And so I think that maybe that could be another way to think about, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we are thinking really like a typology, but at least to think about situations in which some of these decisions could be made using data, and people would be okay doing those decisions, or at least following the recommendation, with the evidence, or situations in which it's just some type of decision support that you are giving this evidence to the decision maker, but then the decision maker is going to basically decide to what extent they use this information into the whole process of making the final decision.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because as you're speaking about that, and there are certain ones you can use artificial intelligence, and then there are others that people really want a lot of input. I think a lot of it will have to do with the openness of people seeing that decision. So if they don't see they don't see the sensors underwater, so that it's not on the front of their mind, where they do see their neighbors getting nice new roads and they're not getting it. And a lot of government decisions are things that people don't notice. So I could see that definitely this is a wonderful model for helping government in a lot of the infrastructure, non-visible things, to become far more proactive than reactive in its decision-making processes. So thank you for that. Brad.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'm calling from NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. In the last conversation, it did seem like there was a bit of an implied sort of communication gap. Like, how do we have all this new evidence, like how do we communicate it more effectively? And I was wondering, did you get a sense in this research that folks were communicating differently or organizing sort of their parameters differently, or sort of changing the way that they were transparent about their decision? Or was it we're more assured of this decision, and all of those sort of evidence pieces sort of became sort of almost hidden in that decision process? Like what are the changes to communication that this is sort of enabling?
Yes, so I think the changes that we saw were less about communication with the public and more about internal communication. And so basically one of the interesting changes, and they are still, trying to get better at that, is because of this tension between what is good evidence and how to use evidence for actual decisions between decision makers and analysts. Analysts started trying to explain more and be more transparent with their methods and the way that they were constructing the models. And one way to do that is with visualizations. So they were trying to use different ways to visualize the data and the results in such a way that they were more friendly with decision makers. The decision makers not always have training in statistical analysis or in general in data management, data analysis. And so it was very difficult for them at the beginning to try to have these conversations of why this evidence was so important to make the final decision. And so they started trying to find ways to make it more easy and understandable. And I think that they were able to make some progress, on that. And they are still working in trying to do that. So as I said, it's more internal communication, how this was changed, but we really don't have evidence, at least not in this project, about more external communication, between the agency and the public.
That's great. Thanks so much.
That answered your question?
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to call on Michael, and I'm sitting here realizing that it's 2 a.m. where you are. So let's consider that in case he sounds tired. It's 2 in the morning, and he's here. So Michael.
Thank you. I've been working on a Eastern Standard Time for the past 6 months, and now I'm completely in sync with Eastern Standard Time. So I'm just starting my day here. Well, thank you, Ramon, I really enjoyed your presentation. I think the case study has a lot that we can learn from and lessons that the government can really learn in this. My question is something related to some of you mentioned here. What is the role of political actors, right? The technology, now we talk about, you mentioned AI algorithm and maybe big data. We have more data, real-time data, and more sophisticated algorithms. So we know, what's happening better and might even be able to predict in the future. But as you mentioned, one part of your case study said the conflict between the viewpoints, between the kind of positions of leadership and the analysts of the data, and then they have the evidences to show. But then political leadership, for various reasons, might just say, no, that's not what's the reality. We are going to take a different route. Like, for example, at the national level with COVID-19, face covering. And I think there's a pretty good evidence, but it's got politicized. And I think this politicization is really, taking hold, if it's not getting worse, if I may say. So we have this possibility, and you laid out, the parts that makes it work, and there are challenges. But can you tell us a little bit more about what you think is the role of the political actors in this big picture of open government and data science, the evidence-based policymaking?
Yes. So I think that as I mentioned a little bit, in one of the previous questions, I think that it's definitely a challenge. I think that if we can, okay, again, if we can see it with hope, I think we have now some political leaders that they are more open to this, that they are at least willing to consider how to use, data and science, to make, decisions. So I think that is good, and it is not only at the federal level. I think that there are people like that at the state and at the local levels too. And so I think that is good. That is a change in culture, I think, and that's important. That's important for us, when we think about the role of political leadership, when using techniques like this. I think the other thing also is the role of public managers, the role of analysts, how our colleagues and students can help political leaders to understand why this is important. Because I understand, sometimes they see it more like a zero-sum game, and also the constituents. So basically, if they are benefited by this, we are not. And so I understand that. But also, when we think about other type of decisions that may have a benefit for everybody, if they follow the data, if they follow the evidence, everybody could be better off. And so again, maybe it's looking for those opportunities, looking for those programs, for those policy domains, for those specific policies in which data-driven decision-making can have the most impact and also the most acceptance, in terms of citizens, in terms of, stakeholders in the policy process, might be a good way to start. And again, maybe this is naive or hopeful, but I think that if we start with that, and now taking into consideration that we have already a few political leaders that are more open to actually follow science and follow, scientific evidence, then I think that could be a way to do it. Now, also being realistic, not everybody, is going to do that. And we are going to still have situations in which we have all the evidence, we have, all the good data and good analysis, and still some political leaders are going to make the decision opposite to what they should be doing. And I think in that regard, again, thinking about all the actors, again, public managers, advocacy groups, other actors should be trying to push to at least, again, as I said, maybe not blindly follow, the evidence, but at least to consider seriously that the data and the evidence can help us to make better decisions for the society as a whole.
Thank you.
Ramon, I love your optimism. I'm sorry, I like that.
I try to be.
Michael,
I
did
try
that
to be.
Yes.
Michael, that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Mete.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a second question. I'm calling from Turkey, and it's almost 9 p.m. here, so I'm not as disadvantaged as Michael, and glad to be part of this. My question is maybe a kind of naive question, but I'll ask it anyway. My question is from a digital divide perspective. Who are the actors who are left behind or feel disadvantaged in this data-driven public administration? And what can be the best way or best ways to decrease their resistance and make them feel less excluded in this new world? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mete. I think this is a very interesting question. So let me give you two different responses depending on which digital divide we are talking about. So I think the first digital divide that we can focus on is actually among government agencies. And actually what we have is that some government agencies, both at the state and local levels, less at the federal level, are not very savvy about technology and data analysis. And actually they rarely use data analysis as a way to make decisions. And so when we are thinking about in this way, then I think that is a long way to go, because basically they would need to be identifying data that they need they could be collecting data that they need or trying to get external data sources, for that. They could need to have data analysts as part of their staff. And again, as I said, at this point, there are a few in many states that are related, for example, to health, to environment protection, to transportation, that they already have that. But there are many others that they don't have that. And local governments, almost all of them, if we're talking about medium and small, they don't have that. So that's really, something to think about. Is a really big challenge. They may be willing to be convinced, but also it's not only about, a changing culture, but also actual resources and capabilities, and they don't have that. Then another way to think about digital divide is actually with the people. So as you may know or may not know, digital divide is something very palpable in the United States. So some people think that that is something from the past, that only happens in some very poor countries. But the reality is that in our case, just 1 hour, 1.5 hours north to Albany, we have communities that they don't have reliable internet access. And sometimes they don't even have cellular coverage. And so digital divide is really alive, in the United States. And so we need to start thinking how to use the different technologies and strategies that we have in such a way that we are not making it worse, that we are really trying to make it better. So just one way, and I know that this is not a solution at all, but one way to start thinking about this is to focus all our efforts not in the front office, because the front office, of course, is only for people who has access, only for people who knows how to use the internet and knows how to use services electronically. But to focus a lot of our effort in the back office. The back office is something that is going to be beneficial for everybody. So if we are making decisions, for example, thinking about this specific topic, data-driven decisions in the back office, then the provision of the service or the implementation of the policy could be by any channel. So it could be the case that you have a multi-channel strategy and that some of the decisions are going to affect people that are receiving the service in multiple ways. So think about services that could be offered through a website, a mobile app, the phone, even the traditional mail. So basically, one way to start thinking of digital divide, of course, it would be great if we can actually bridge the gap. But now that we are not at that point, I think that one good starting point, what good first step is just thinking about that, how we can focus our efforts on the back office in such a way that the benefits are very similar, maybe not the same, but very similar for people with very different levels of access and skills in terms of technology.
Great, thank you. Michael.
I don't know if this is something that you can answer in 3 minutes we have left here, but one thing that was mentioned was theory is not necessary anymore. And I think that is a great question. I mean, let's say in a kind of far future, we have all the data, real time, complete, comprehensive coming in, and we can analyze them in a real time. And, I think the recent Nobel Prize in economics also was greatly aided by the new methodology and data. What is the future of theory in public administration in that environment? Is it still relevant, and how so?
Yeah, that's a good question, Michael. And as you said, maybe we cannot, answer that, in a few minutes. But I would say that my own view about that is that no, we are going to still use a theory. I think theory is still important because that's a way for us to have different safeguards, in terms of how we are thinking about reality. I think part of the problem, and this is not only with big data, but with any data, when we are what they call data-driven, we are able to understand the problem of that specific sample, of that specific agency, of that specific case. But rarely we are able to generalize, to other realities. And I think that's the same problem with big data, because we are going to never have information about the whole world. Well, maybe one day, maybe one day, as Simon said, sometime, we are going to have an AI controlling the whole world. But I think that is very difficult to imagine. So the reality is that we are going to have information about, let's say, a city, and then we are going to have a lot of knowledge about that city. But whether that information is going to tell us what is going to happen in a different city, even in the same country or in a different country, I think that is not going to be that easy. And so my personal opinion is that we are going to still rely on theory, at least for many, many years. But I might be wrong, I might be wrong.
Thank you so much. All right, so we have 2 minutes left, and I have had a request for a screenshot of all our happy faces. So you can leave if you want, you can have your real face there, or oh, there we go. And we're gonna smile, so this way I'm not catching people in the middle of talking and you have the talk face going. All right, everybody's ready? 1, 2, 3. And let me just do one more, just to be on the safe side. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you again so much for spending your Thursday lunch with us and learning about a very prevalent and important topic going forth into the future with public administration and big data and analysis, and what some of the opportunities and challenges could be, and what we should consider when we do our own research, or if we're in the public side, when we're trying to implement change or make data-driven decisions. So thank you all. Thank you again, Ramon. Michael, do you want to? No? Okay, so I guess that's just it. So thank you, everyone. Have a fabulous day, a wonderful weekend. It's a long weekend in the US for President's Day. And don't forget, Sunday is Valentine's Day. So I will give you that little heads up in case anybody forgot. In the US, Valentine's Day. And outside the US, it's always just nice to give people flowers and chocolate. So thank you again. Have a fabulous week.
Thank you, Georgette. Thank you, Ramon.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you, Ramon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.